the last, few days, it feels like the emotions for Dallas Cowboys fans, Cowboys Nation, have been quite all over the place. A lot more skewing toward anger, frustration, embarrassment even. From your vantage point, and I know people are like, quit beating the damn dead horse with Randy Gregory, but I'm just so fascinated by how all of this went down. From your vantage point, how did this go down based on what we know and what we've come to learn about the parties involved when it comes to Randy Gregory?
The interesting thing about it, and Bobby can attest to this because we've had conversations about this prior to the terms being agreed to, and then after the bombshell implosion with the contract. But as much as Bobby, myself, and several other colleagues, shared a lot of information and tried to get interpretation of what was going on, here's my timeline. So a couple of weeks or so ago, and obviously I've been monitoring the progress or lack thereof with Randy Gregory since the offseason began. Actually, prior to that, because I put out a couple of articles on CBS Sports saying that the Cowboys and Randy Gregory had mutual interest in getting a deal done. And, that goes back as far as training camp, if not a little bit around that time. So that was still the energy and that was still the vibe, but I hadn't heard anything about any traction. So I reached out to some sources a couple of weeks ago, and basically I was told that there had been no traction. Now, that was a little bit disturbing, but the way it was positioned to me was that the Cowboys were so focused at that moment on trying to figure out the resolution with Amari Cooper. They were trying to figure out a resolution with DeMarcus Lawrence. And then coming around the pike was the Lyle Collins decision. They need to make a decision on Lyle Collins. So they're sitting here, and then, of course, are they going to tag Dalton Schultz? Are they not going to tag Dalton Schultz? So presumably they had their plate full, but that was strike one, I was told. Strike one was Gregory's camp felt a little bit disrespected because here you have one of the better edge rush names going into free agency. You've had an opportunity the entire season and up to this point in the offseason to broach the conversation of negotiations, and you have not done that until Monday when legal tampering began. So on Sunday, I had a more robust conversation with a couple of sources who then told me that the Denver Broncos were a front runner. I reached out to a couple of guys in Denver who confirmed that, and that's when I went with that scoop on Monday morning saying, hey, no traction just yet with the Cowboys and Randy Gregory, but both sides are on the same page. But the Cowboys are going to have competition. That competition is going to be several teams, but the front runner will be the Denver Broncos. Over the course of Monday, I want to say late Monday afternoon, I did a quick check-in, and I was told, hey, there's been traction. There's been progress. I put that tweet out there saying, hey, update. There's been positive movement. The Cowboys have made an initial offer. Now, at that time, I was told, and it was described to me as a quote-unquote noticeable gap. Now, I didn't release this information until after the implosion because you guys know as insiders, sometimes you have to sit on information and let some things play out. But I did describe it initially as a noticeable gap. The noticeable gap was about $45 million annually. So to clear it up for everyone and those who, watch YouTubers who don't know how to interpret my words and my reports, the report was not that there was someone offering Randy Gregory a max value of $90 million. The report that I put out there was that the initial offer from the Cowboys was about $45 million off annually. And this is confirmed by the report that I put out in that same breath, was that the Cowboys needed to close that gap, even if not completely, at least come to a compromising point. Now, it was working in the Cowboys' favor that because they've done so much for Randy Gregory, which is a truth, they've done so much to help him build a support system around himself, that Gregory was willing to concede a little bit on the cost. And that's why I reported that they don't necessarily have to match the next best offer.
Dollar for dollar, yeah.
Correct. Now, turns out that they did. Fantastic. Wonderful. And when they did, it was a done deal. Both sides agreed to the deal. And as I'm working on, some other positions of need for the Cowboys, and however long that was after we broke the news, Bobby and I broke the news that they had agreed to terms, ding, I look at my phone, source text says Denver instead. I was so thrown aback by it, fellas. I thought he was trolling me, like the source. I literally thought the source was trolling me. That's why it took me a moment to get my update out there to say it's a pivot to Denver. It was because I took that extra moment to send the text back to the source, and I said, "You're kidding me, right?" with a laughing face emoji, and he was like, "Dead serious." Okay, now the sugar honey iced tea is hitting the fan. That led to me doing a ton of digging, which also included conversations with our good friend Bobby over here and several other sources as well. I actually reached out to Randy Gregory as well. I reached out to Gregory shortly after I got the news that he had agreed to terms. The best way to describe his emotion at that time was jubilation, elation. He was ecstatic because as much as the Cowboys have done for him, he wanted to remain in Dallas. He wanted to see the next stage of his NFL career that he had been working so hard towards obtaining to come to fruition here in Dallas. So It was a dream come true for him finally. But then I followed up with him after the implosion, the contractual implosion, and it wasn't as much anger that I sensed from him as much as it was heartbreak. And I think a lot of people need to understand who are going at Randy Gregory as an individual. Randy Gregory was disappointed and heartbroken at what happened with the Cowboys. And as it was described to me, and all the fact, for the most part, most of the facts are out there between myself, Bobby, our good friend Jane Slater, Ed Werder of ESPN, Todd Archer, the list goes on and on, Clarence Hill Jr. of Fort Worth Star Telegram. You fans have a multitude of different outlets in which you can obtain this information, and then you can make the decision in your belief based, upon what you see. But it was framed to me as such, and I've gotten it from both sides, from several sources, including fellow journalists. The terms had already been agreed to. Now, keep in mind, I said strike one was the Cowboys not broaching the topic of a contract extension with Randy Gregory until legal tampering. So that was one. Strike two was the initial offer was nowhere near what others were offering. So it wasn't that the Cowboys didn't fire out of the gate with a 5-year, $70 million deal with $28 million guaranteed. That's not how negotiations work. You guys and I both know that's not how it works. It was that the first offer was quite literally viewed as a lowball. You're $5 million per year off. And that's just the annual salary. We're not talking about what the guaranteed money was. And the guaranteed money was nearing $10 million off. So there was a lot more incentives than Gregory's camp were comfortable with. And that's fair because that's what agents are for. So finally, you hash all of this out, and it comes to a positive resolution on Monday. And then, pause. The reason it came to a positive resolution was Jerry Jones.
Yes.
This was not a Jerry Jones error that caused this implosion. The only reason it got to the point where terms were agreed to was because Jerry Jones reached out to Gregory and his camp, and he sold him on why he needs to remain with the Cowboys. And it wasn't a hard sell.
Sure.
Sometimes it just takes Jerry getting on the phone. So when Jerry got on the phone, that made strike one feel a little bit less impactful because it's like, okay, now Jerry's on the phone. But the clause that was to be inserted, number one, and this is strike three, it was to be inserted after the terms had already been agreed upon. So that's strike three. So if we're talking about baseball, you're out. But it was also the language, the specific language. Some are interpreting all of this as, he was afraid that he's going to get suspended again, and that's why he didn't want the language in. It wasn't the suspension language. So number one, again, it was the fact that they're trying to insert the clause after the terms are agreed to. And piggybacking on my point about Jerry Jones, this was unbeknownst to Jerry Jones. Jerry came in, did his job, closed the deal, and walked away. So what happened thereafter was a complete surprise to Jerry Jones. So yes, I am told that Jerry Jones was absolutely furious at how this went down. This is a lot of egg on his face, sunny side up.
Okay.
But it's also the language that includes fines. So it wasn't just suspensions, but the clause that could void the guaranteed money on Randy Gregory was as simple as a fine. And you and I, all three of us, all know how arbitrary fines can be in the NFL. And the fine
and not just fines. I want to clarify one thing that people keep saying. It was not just fines relating to drug policy. It was fines relating to a lot of other things.
It was not necessarily all encompassing, is my understanding, but it was more far reaching than simply a violation of the NFL's drug policy or personal conduct policy. I mean, it really went down to the point where there was going to be ambiguity. For example, let's say Randy Gregory and, there was someone who put something out there that said, okay, well, what if he gets fined for an act on the field? See, now there's a gray area.
Right.
You're going to sign a contract that includes a clause that can void your $28 million in guaranteed money that wasn't even agreed upon by either party before we got to this point, and that's strike 3 while Denver is on hold. Once that the clause was attempted to be inserted after, then came and of course that was strike 3, but then came the disagreement on if it's standard language versus if it is not standard language. And the word standard, as we are learning, for those that may not have known prior to the situation, that's a relative term, because what's standard to you and I isn't necessarily standard to the rest of the free world.
Or to the rest of the roster.
Right, nor the rest of the roster.
Or the league.
So the Cowboys were adamant that this clause that says that we can guarantee we can void your guaranteed money in the event of a fine. I want to stress that, in the event of a fine that is not solely tied to any type of drug suspension or anything like that. Cowboys were adamant, this is standard. This isn't everybody's contract. Okay, well, Gregory's camp did some digging, and lo and behold, no, it isn't. It's not in Dak Prescott's contract. So,
which, can I ask a question?
Sure,
I was talking to CA earlier today. We were just chatting on the phone.
Shouts out to Chris.
Yes, got you down. Mm-hmm. So we got.
It's not your line.
I just like the salt. I take.
It's
CA's,
a bit, Bobby.
I take
Damn it, it's
stuff.
a bit.
Anyway,
Jeez.
no, we were talking about the state. If the language that was presented in Randy's contract was in Dak's, would his fine after the season for the referee comments, would that have been the same sort of thing where they could have avoided it?
Because they could have technically,
and they claim they've never done this before. Like, for instance, I don't know that Lyle's guarantees are voided. Like, even though they could have done that, I don't know that they are.
His are off a suspension though.
But I mean, same thing though. It still hits it.
Yeah.
And so what I do it made me wonder. Like, I was like, I wonder if that language was in Dak's thing about like fines as well. If that would have been. Because wasn't the referee comments conduct detrimental? Wasn't that a conduct detrimental fine?
Yeah.
From Dak?
Yeah.
Yes.
And conduct detrimental is a fine relating to conduct detrimental was part of what was in Randy's contract. Right. So that, in theory, could have voided Dak's guarantees if that would have been in his contract.
But this is very a very loaded explanation of everything, and I say that because you have those that are saying, well, the clause was in Randy Gregory's rookie deal, not with this specific wording. But I'll also say this: Randy Gregory doesn't have the same agent he had when he came into the league and signed that deal. So for those that are saying, well, Peter Schaefer, what did he have his eyes closed on the initial deal, on his rookie deal? Well, no, Schaefer was not Randy Gregory's agent at that time. Mm-hmm. So when Schaefer says something like, oh, well, I haven't seen this language in 30 years, I can neither confirm nor deny if that's true. But what I can confirm is that he hasn't seen it in one of the Cowboys contracts because he hasn't had to dance with the Cowboys to that nature. And a good friend of mine who shall remain nameless brought up a very good point, that it's very possible that this is a situation where the Cowboys this isn't the first time they've done this, where they've agreed to terms with someone after negotiation and then said, hey, by the way, one thing we forgot, ... let's put this in. And more often than not, probably the player or the agent that they're speaking with acquiesces and says, hey, you know what? Okay, not that serious, my guy. We don't want to go through this dance with someone else. Let's just go ahead and do it. And it's quite possible that Gregory and his agent were the first ones that were like, no, you can't pull that fast one on us like you pull on everyone else. So that's a potential layer to it as well. But in the end, as Bobby reported this morning, the Cowboys did get back to work trying to smooth some things over with him overnight into the morning hours. But as I reported yesterday, when asked about it on Twitter, it's over. Randy Gregory and his
camp, Vince Carter.
Yeah,
over?
Like after the Vince
it's
Carter
over.
It's over. He's not
over, ladies and
back.
Gentlemen.
He already, as you know, he's already flown out to Denver. And by the time we have this conversation, I'm not sure that he hasn't already put pen to paper. So now the Cowboys are in a situation where they had to pivot to contingency plans, and kudos to them for having contingency plans, because although they didn't know that this was going to end like this with Randy Gregory, there was always a chance that they would lose Gregory. So they had contingency plans, e.g. Von Miller, Zadarius Smith when he became available, Chandler Jones was another, and they really had an eye on Zadarius Smith because that's right up their alley. He's coming off an injury. He's going to be discounted, presumably. But the Ravens proved that he was not going to be discounted.
Baltimore said, you want to come on home, Zadarius?
Baltimore said,
you want to come on home?
We're not even going to talk to you about a discount. We're just going to give you market value, actually over market value. So now the Cowboys are in a position where there's some pressure being applied now. You've lost your plan A B, C, and D. So now you're in tier B. And there's a lot of talent out there in free agency, so to speak, when it comes to who they might be able to get. But now, if you go to cbssports.com and you see the top options for Cowboys edge rushers in free agency, I had tier A and tier B. Where tier A is gone.
I'm going to say all of tier A, I think it's
all
gone.
All of tier A is gone, and they all left today.
Von Miller, which, by the way, I got to give a shout-out to our friend Newey Scruggs, who just 6 minutes ago tweeted this. I'm told Dak Prescott put more effort into recruiting Von Miller than Cowboys management. Once Gregory signed with Denver, Miller had Dallas as his number one destination. Dallas never made an offer. The Cowboys need someone in the locker room that understands what it takes to win a Super Bowl. So Newey's hearing that most of that was so we had DeMarcus Ware and Dak Prescott
Time out.
And Ezekiel Elliott with the retweet and Micah Parsons.
And I want you to read that one part real slow.
Like, get Steven a Twitter account so at least he can do the eyes emoji on an Instagram post or something. Like,
do something. That Von Miller's number one destination
was Dallas. According to Newey.
Dallas?
Mm-hmm. According to Newey Scruggs from NBC5, our wonderful partners.
Fire this organization into the hot, burning sun.
Wow, KG.
Now here's what I don't understand. Earl Thomas, when he was good, hey Jason, hey y'all, come get me. When Jamal Adams, theoretically, when he was good, you can feel how you want about Jamal Adams. Theoretically, when he was good, Jamal Adams like, hey, I would love to come home. My big brother, God brother, Michael Irvin, I want to come home and play. You didn't do it. Now, according to Newey Scruggs, Von Miller's number one destination was to come to Dallas, and you didn't even offer him a contract. You got your quarterback out here recruiting, and he was not even able to get a contract offer?
I'm guessing the reason why, like, when they say never made an offer, when Newey says that, I'm guessing it's because they just generally, like they did with Randy, they generally discussed some price points. We're like, oh, this isn't anywhere close. So cool. All right.
I'm just saying, you didn't even get a chance to tell no.
It's just I always tell the story about Michael Brockers. Like, they're like, we're really interested in you, Michael Brockers, a couple off seasons ago. And then he was like, well, what are you thinking here? And he's like 12 annually. And they're like, oh, we were thinking 4. So sorry. And that's how far off you are.
Here's the added twist when it comes to Gregory. And this is why I'm really riding Captain Crunch on this one. Is that
or Catboy?
Yeah, Catboy. Shouts out to Skywalker Steele. Once the Cowboys realized that they wanted to move forward with Randy Gregory, which was months ago, you've had all the way up until this moment being yesterday, to secure something with him. So if anything had gone wrong in the negotiations prior to legal tampering opening, you still had the leverage to say, you know what? There's no telling what contracts you're going to offers you're going to receive. This clause is probably going to be in all of them. Like, you probably could have gotten away with that because there was no tangible proof to the opposite, to the contrary. But by allowing it to get that far, you allowed yourself zero margin for error. Zero. So when the error occurred, all he had to do was pivot to one of the other teams that that were on his phone. So the Cowboys put themselves in the predicament they're in right now. And now I'm not going to go as far and say that they're scrambling, but they're feeling the pressure because, again, you got these tier B guys out there, which are still good. But the way I look at it is tier B being a guy like Melvin Ingram, Trey Flowers, Derek Barnett, for example. But these are guys that you can bring in who can still be impactful. But now you have to combine them with a guy like a signing of Durant Armstrong to make sure that those two replace what you would have gotten from either Randy Gregory, Chandler Jones, Von Miller, or Zadarius Smith. Now, I will say this. Von Miller, congratulations for getting in your bag, boss. EYE would not.
Well, I mean, it averages out to about 17.5 million for the 3 years.
What makes me adverse to it is
817. Yes, I'm assuming Scruggs is telling the truth. I know he's telling the truth.
What makes me adverse to it is, number one, of the 3 that I mentioned, Miller, Jones, and Zadarius Smith, I had Jones as my 1A. So if you look at Chandler Jones's contract, he's averaging 17 million. I think he got 50 million guaranteed. 51, something like that. I'm not going to pay.
Or no, not 51. I think it was 51 total, but his guarantees I think were in the 30s.
I'm not willing to pay more for Von Miller than I would have for Chandler Jones. And that's kind of where I am with it. Now, that's not me saying I wouldn't have paid Von Miller. That's nonsense. That's not what I'm saying at all. I absolutely would have paid Von Miller, just not what the Bills paid him. So
even though the guarantees weren't much more than Randy, because the guarantees ended up being they were like 34.
28.
No, I know, but the guarantees in Von's were 34. So you would have to go 6 over.
He gets 40 plus up front, like as a fully guaranteed at signing. His total guarantees are about 51.5, 52 million.
On Von's?
On Von.
I thought the guarantees on that one were like 36.
No, he's getting more than 40
he's getting
up front at signing. And then a total of 51.5, 52 if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's 51.5.
Total is also kind of it's like Coops. When Coops was total was 60 million guaranteed, that included 20 that was guaranteed on the 5th day of the league. And
let's throw another variable out there. Let's throw another variable out there. You've already pissed off DeMarcus Lawrence. Okay, you pissed him off because you approached him with a pay cut.
How bad is that? That the guy who even re-signed here is like, they were very disrespectful 3 days ago.
Right. The fact that he looked Stephen Jones in the face and said, "What kind of SHIT is this?"
Oh,
so
can't spell it out.
I can't even spell it out.
No.
Oh no. Okay. So nonetheless, you would absolutely alienate DeMarcus Lawrence. So yeah, DeMarcus Lawrence, he got a new deal. 30 million guaranteed over 3 years. I mean, it has the void year, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that you approached DeMarcus Lawrence with a 1 year, $10 million offer to the point where he was so upset that, to his own admission, he told them, go ahead and cut me. He said, thank you for everything, but it's time we part ways. And he said as recently as this week, he thought he was going to be in another uniform. And not 48 hours after that, one of the key retentions that he had in mind when he did the new deal, i.e. Randy Gregory, you botch that, and then you're going to turn around and give anybody, 52 million guaranteed. Look at it from the bigger picture of the locker room as well. If I'm DeMarcus Lawrence, yeah, thank you so much for this 30 million fully guaranteed, but look at what I had to go through to get it. And this guy, whomever they may be, hasn't done anything for this organization just yet. But you're willing to give them 20 plus million more than you're going to give me. You got to think about it from a locker room aspect as well. So again, congratulations to Von Miller. I'm a huge player advocate. I want all players to get the biggest bag possible. But if I put on my GM hat, Patrik would not have paid that.